This all happened at the very beginning of this year, in January 2021. I inherited my grandfather's acreage, which is roughly 300 plus. He used it for hunting, agriculture, and other things that I'm probably not even aware of. I'm always curious about the wildlife that lives back there, since it's mostly denser woods. Even in the winter, when all the foliage dies, and it's pretty cleared out with all empty trees, it still is a little bit more dense. So, I went back there with about 6 game cams, stuck it on several different trees, just to see what I could find besides deer. It was more just a fun experiment than anything. But as I was setting them up, I experienced something bone-chilling. This awful feeling had come over me. I can't even begin to describe to you how terrible it was. I needed to drop what I was doing and run. Run for my life. Run for my safety, my sanity. It was so strange how the feeling would just come over me so suddenly. And then, before I could even act or not act on it, I began hearing whispers or chanting all around me. It appeared to be, or sounded like it was omnidirectional. Below me, above me, all around me, and would circulate. I had a hard time deciphering how close or how far it was, but it was like a group of people, or one person. It sounded like it would alternate, of like somebody whispering, or whispering a chant. It was very eerie, and very scary. I'm sorry I don't have any more details, but that was enough. I ran back to the house, and stayed there. After a few days, I kind of forgot about it, and at this point, it was probably a Saturday. I was off work, and decided it would be best to utilize the daylight of the early day, and go and fetch the few game cams I did manage to get up, just to make sure that they were working, since there were a lot of wildlife back there, even in the wintertime. As I went to go get the cameras, all 3 that I had placed up were gone. Not a single one could be found. The last time it had snowed was the morning that I set up the game cams, so my tracks were there, but nobody else's. And the cameras were just gone. There was no sign of anybody even coming up to them and taking them off. On top of that, this property is pretty secluded, out in the middle of nowhere. I don't even know the nearest neighbor, and nobody else hunts back here, since it is private property. And during this time of year, hunting isn't even active anyway, so there's absolutely zero reason why anybody should even be out here, let alone touching another person's game cams. After looking further, I gave up after finding no trail or sign that where these game cams could have gone. I still don't know, but I almost wonder if that horrifying supernatural chanting or whispering has something to do with it. I live down in central Texas. It all began with a friend of mine, whom we'll call Luke, needing a ride back to a town from Houston. He's like family, so I went and brought him on back. He stays kind of near the Dripping Springs area. Before, he was in Houston. He and I always heard some strange sounds at night on his property, but we always shrugged it off. He's got livestock, so we often protect them from coyotes and other things. Plus, we normally shoot guns out there and don't really worry about what's lurking out there. The night I brought him back, we pulled into his long driveway to head to the house along the driveway. He has creatures are tall, but hear me out. Down by the pit from the car, we both noticed 2 blue-bordered, massive yellow eyes in my headlight beams, staring straight at us. So I said, "Luke, what is that? Do you see that?" As I reached for my flashlight and one of my firearms, I ended up grabbing my .22 with hollow points. I jumped out of my car to run straight to the gleaming eyes. They seemed to blink once, and then vanished into the dark. I ran to where I saw it standing, looked all around, the whole FBI flashlight handgun stance, scanning. I hear footsteps approaching from behind. Startling at first, but these steps were from Luke, coming up behind me, yelling, "Watch out." I turn around to him, just a few feet away. He'd stopped. He looked confused, looks around, and then said, "It was just behind you, and it was waist high." I think to myself, what's waist high, and has night vision? Mountain lions. So that's what I thought for a moment, still standing in that spot. He says, "We need more gear." So we went to my car. We loaded up, killed the engine, then back into the trees. We approached the tree line, aiming the lights into the light upwards, and see those same eyes dart in a straight line to our left, further into the trees, away from my car, away from his house. Now we're spooked. How is it 9 to 10 feet up in the air, or trees, without making a single noise? No wing flap, no twigs, footsteps, just dead silence. It's about 2:30 a.m. now. We'd been following and going the direction we saw the eyes trail towards, staying very quiet. Suddenly, I promise and swear on my life to this day, out of the thicket, about 8 feet in front of me, I see the eyes open within the darkness of the woods, massive and glowing, and a few inches apart, which made me assume that this creature has size on its side. It stared into me. I stared back. I'm facing this unknown creature at this moment, and I shakily ask, "Luke, are you seeing this?" Not moving my flashlight, and not breaking eye contact. I want to know where this thing is, and I want to know if it moves. "I don't, dude. What do you see?" So I asked him again, if he's sure he's not seeing this. He says he doesn't again. I assume the only reason he did not see these eyes is because my flashlight and my angle with the beam. He was not standing directly in front of the creature, as he was about 6 feet to my right at that moment. So I understand why he couldn't see what I saw, due to angle and perspective. After that little back and forth, I see it approach me. It got closer. I raised my handgun. I said out loud, "I'm firing." Then I fired at this unknown being, directly between the eyes. The round I'd fired stirred up a lot. We heard a very short but low-pitched growl or grunt, followed by what sounded like something very heavy, easily heavier than myself, knocking into a couple of trees around it. No retreating, and stayed there a few moments longer, listening, scanning. We stayed out there, waiting to hear or see anything else for about an hour after that, but the night remained quiet and calm afterwards. We go inside, call it a weird day, and then go to bed. Then we found a bunch of triangle-shaped footprints that led to the fence. We look up. There's a break in the top fencing wires. Right on the other side of the break, a few limbs and branches had been freshly broken off as they lay there on the ground. Some remained dangling and facing the forest floor, like where you would land if you were to jump from the wire break at the top. This is all I have on this story, other than the fact that my friend and I, to this day, still occasionally see those eyes at night, in our dreams, and even in our windows. This was a few years ago, and I have not done much research on it, until very recently. My family and I had gone up to my grandparents' house. They had 10 acres of land, and only used about 1.5 acres for the house and yard. They had a large dense pine forest all around their house, except for the road to it there was forest for miles all around. They had cut down some trees to make four-wheeler paths that we could ride on when we would go up there. One day, My sister and I were riding out on the paths on some of my grandparents' four-wheelers. For whatever reason, I think it was to get a drink, but I don't entirely remember. My sister went inside. I thought nothing of it, kept riding the four-wheeler I was on. Well, 3 minutes later, I was driving past a really dense patch of forest. Over the four-wheeler engine, I heard a loud growl. I heard it clearly to my left in the patch of woods. Thinking it was just a coyote, I looked over towards where I heard the growl. I did not see any coyote. You know that feeling when you look into a forest at night and you get scared that something will stare back at you? Well, this happened to me, but in the very middle of the day. What I was looking at still haunts me to this day. I was staring into two large yellow eyes. It appeared that they were sunken into the creature's face. The eyes were probably about 2 times the size of a normal human eye, and they were watching me. I could see by looking at the eyes alone that this was an intelligent, smart creature. I didn't get to see what it was, large, like probably about 10 feet tall. About 8 feet up this bush is where I saw these eyes. I couldn't see any part of this creature, but I did not stick around to find out what it was. I put the four-wheeler into drive, sped up to about 60 miles an hour. I ran inside and did not go back out on the path for the rest of the trip. Nobody else in my family saw anything, but I was terrified of whatever it was. Fast forward 6 years, and it is this year. I was talking with my friend about spooky things that we had seen. I told him about this story, and began to wonder what I could have possibly seen. I did a lot of research on what large predatory animals live up there in Idaho. It is northern Idaho, if you don't believe me and want to go check. After doing a little bit of digging, I found that, well, no animals were 8 feet tall. I didn't believe it. I was skeptical of anything that was paranormal. I checked again and again because I didn't want to believe it, that there was something that nobody had ever captured or been able to prove existed. The largest wolf ever found would have only been 6 feet when standing on its hind legs. The largest bear might have been big enough, but it could not have fit into that bush. So I began to research any possible creature that it could have been. Eventually, I did find one. A Wendigo. It's the only possible creature it could have been. I don't know why it did not attack me, or why it let me get away. Based off the features I saw, the large, yellow, sunken-in eyes, it could have only been a Wendigo. What scared me even more is that a couple of years later, my grandparents moved out of that house for an unknown reason. They say it was to be closer to the family, but the family was fine making a long drive and coming up very often. They moved only a little bit closer. It's still a long drive.